My name is Emma Collins and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood outside the old white farmhouse where I grew up and watched strangers carry furniture through the front door. A bright red sold sign leaned against the mailbox. I hadn't signed any papers. I hadn't agreed to sell. And yet, the home where my grandfather raised me no longer belonged to our family. My older brother, Daniel, stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets and calmly said, "It's done. You can't change it now." What he didn't know was that Grandpa had trusted me with something years earlier, a small brass key. He told me, "If people ever fight over this house, open the bottom drawer of my desk before you believe anyone." At the time, I laughed and forgot about it. Standing in that driveway, I suddenly remembered every word. Before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back 15 years. Our grandfather, Harold Collins, wasn't wealthy. He drove the same pickup truck for 20 years, wore patched flannel shirts, and repaired everything instead of buying new. But he believed in one thing above all else: character lasts longer than money. My brother Daniel never agreed. Even as a teenager, he cared about appearances, new cars, expensive watches, and impressing people who barely knew him. I preferred quiet evenings on Grandpa's porch, listening to stories while helping him fix old clocks. He used to smile and say, "You're the only one who listens until the end." When Grandpa's health declined, I visited every weekend. Daniel rarely came. He always had another business meeting, another trip, another excuse. Still, whenever neighbors asked who would inherit the farmhouse, Daniel confidently answered, "Obviously me, I'm the oldest." Grandpa never corrected him. He simply kept drinking his coffee and changed the subject. The silence would matter later, very much later. Grandpa Harold passed away on a quiet Sunday morning in October. The funeral was simple, exactly the way he would have wanted. Neighbors brought homemade pies, old friends shared stories, and the local pastor spoke about honesty, hard work, and keeping your word. Daniel stood in the front row, wearing an expensive black suit. He shook every hand and thanked every guest as though he had been Grandpa's closest companion. I stayed near the back, holding the faded baseball cap Grandpa used to wear while fixing fences. Only I knew that he had kept that cap for 20 years because I gave it to him on my 15th birthday. After the service, Daniel pulled me aside. "We should sell the farmhouse," he said. "It's old, expensive to maintain, and neither of us lives there anymore." I looked at him in surprise. "We haven't even discussed Grandpa's wishes." "He never left instructions," Daniel replied with confidence. "The practical thing is to cash out." Something about his certainty bothered me. Grandpa was the kind of man who labeled every toolbox, every folder, every photograph. The idea that he had left nothing behind didn't make sense. A week later, I drove to the farmhouse alone. Dust covered the windows, and the front porch creaked beneath my feet. Inside, everything was exactly as Grandpa had left it. His reading glasses rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. His coffee mug still sat by the sink. Walking through those rooms felt like stepping into frozen time. I remembered the brass key. After searching through my purse, I found it tucked inside an old coin pouch where it had been forgotten for years. The study smelled of cedar wood and old paper. Against the far wall stood Grandpa's heavy oak desk. The bottom drawer was locked. My hands trembled as I inserted the tiny brass key. With a soft click, the drawer opened. Inside was a single envelope with my name written across the front in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. Underneath it rested a leather folder tied with blue ribbon. I reached for the envelope first. Before I could open it, my phone rang. "Daniel, where are you?" he asked. "At the house." His voice changed instantly. "You need to leave. The realtor is coming tomorrow. I've already accepted an offer." I froze. "You sold the property?" "It's already done, Emma," he replied. "There's nothing left to discuss." I slowly looked back at the unopened letter in my hand. For the first time, I realized Grandpa might have expected this exact moment, and whatever was inside that envelope could change everything. Waited until the call ended before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly into thirds. Grandpa's handwriting was steady, just as I remembered. "Emma, if you're reading this, someone is probably trying to make decisions faster than they should. Slow down. The truth doesn't disappear just because people rush." My heart pounded as I kept reading. "There is another folder beneath this drawer. It contains documents I asked my attorney to prepare years ago. If anyone claims this house without your knowledge, take those papers to him before signing anything." I knelt on the floor and looked deeper into the desk. Hidden beneath the wooden base was a false
never been requested. My permission had never been given. The sale Daniel bragged about suddenly looked far less certain. Just then another call came in. This time it was an unfamiliar number. "Miss Collins," the voice asked politely. "This is Rebecca Lawson from Lawson and Pierce Realty. Your brother informed us that all family members had approved the transaction. We're finalizing paperwork tomorrow." I took a slow breath. "I haven't signed anything," I replied. Silence filled the line. Then Rebecca quietly said, "In that case, we may have a serious problem." Within an hour, she asked me to email copies of the trust documents. By evening, the closing meeting had been postponed indefinitely. Daniel had no idea. He believed the buyers would receive the keys the next morning. Instead, the realtor was reviewing evidence that suggested the sale might not even be legally valid. As the sun set over Grandpa's old porch, I placed the letter back into its envelope and looked across the empty fields. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt prepared, because Grandpa hadn't just left me a house, he had left me proof. The closing meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Friday. Daniel arrived early, wearing a tailored navy suit and carrying the confidence of someone who believed the deal was already finished. The buyer sat across the table with their real estate agent, ready to sign the final documents. Then, the conference room door opened. I walked in with Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Franklin Hayes, carrying the leather portfolio I had found in the hidden compartment of the old desk. Daniel's smile faded. "What is she doing here?" he asked. Mr. Hayes calmly placed several documents on the table. "I'm here because this property cannot legally be sold without Miss Emma Collins' written consent," he said. The buyers exchanged worried looks. Daniel laughed nervously. "That's impossible. I'm the sole heir." Mr. Hayes slid the trust agreement across the table. "You are not." The room fell silent. Every signature, every notarized page, and every county record confirmed the same thing. Grandpa had transferred the farmhouse into a trust years before his death, naming Emma and Daniel as equal beneficiaries. Any sale required both signatures. Mine was missing. The buyers immediately withdrew from the transaction. The realtor apologized and cancelled the closing. Daniel turned toward me, frustration written across his face. "You ruined everything." I looked at him quietly. "No," I replied. "I just refuse to let you rewrite Grandpa's wishes." Mr. Hayes then opened one final envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter Grandpa had left for both of us. "If you are reading this together, remember that a family home is more than wood and land. It is built on trust. If either of you chooses greed over honesty, I hope the other chooses integrity instead." Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. A month later, we reached a peaceful settlement. I purchased Daniel's share of the property at an independently appraised value, ensuring he was compensated fairly while honoring Grandpa's intentions. The farmhouse stayed in the family. I restored the front porch, repaired the old fence, and hung Grandpa's baseball cap beside the fireplace. Every spring, my children helped me plant tomatoes in the same garden where Grandpa once taught me patience. People sometimes ask whether I'm angry about what happened. The truth is, I'm not, because Grandpa's greatest gift was never the house. It was the lesson hidden inside that final letter. Documents can protect property, but character is what protects a family.
Life settled into a quiet rhythm after the farmhouse officially became mine. I restored the weathered front porch, repainted the white fence, and turned Grandpa's old workshop into a small community space where local kids could learn woodworking on weekends. One Saturday morning, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Jenkins stopped by carrying a tin of homemade cookies. "I'm glad you kept the place," she said. "Your grandfather always hoped someone would preserve it." Then she handed me a faded photograph. It showed Grandpa standing beside the farmhouse nearly 40 years earlier with a group of neighborhood children. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words, "A house is only valuable when its doors stay open to good people." I framed the photo and hung it in the hallway. Weeks later, Daniel called unexpectedly. He wanted to bring his son to visit the farm. I agreed. Watching my nephew run through the fields reminded me that children inherit more than property. They inherit the choices adults make. Before leaving, Daniel quietly placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a handwritten apology. It wasn't long, but it was sincere. For the first time in many years, our family took a small step toward healing. 10 years later, the farmhouse looked almost exactly as Grandpa had left it. The plum trees still bloomed every spring. The old porch swing still creaked in the evening breeze. My children, now teenagers, knew every corner of the property by heart. One afternoon, they asked why Grandpa had hidden the letter instead of simply telling everyone his wishes. I smiled, because he knew actions reveal character better than words. That evening, we gathered around the fireplace and reread his final letter together. No one argued. No one talked about money. Instead, we remembered the man who quietly planned ahead so that honesty would have a chance to win. As the sun disappeared behind the fields, I locked the oak desk and slipped the tiny brass key into its drawer. Some family treasures are measured in acres. Some are measured in dollars. But the greatest inheritance Grandpa ever left us was the wisdom to choose integrity over greed. And that legacy, unlike any house or fortune, could never be sold. For weeks after the cancelled sale, Daniel refused to answer my calls. The farmhouse sat empty while lawyers finalized the paperwork and the buyers quietly moved on. Neighbors in town began asking questions. Rumors spread that Grandpa's estate had become a legal mess. The truth was much simpler. One signature had been missing. Mine. Mr. Hayes, Grandpa's attorney, invited both of us to his office. He placed 2 folders on the table. One option, he explained, is years of litigation that will cost both of you time and money. He slid the second folder toward us. The other option is cooperation. Daniel looked exhausted. The confidence he carried at the closing meeting was gone. Finally, he spoke. I thought Grandpa wanted me to have the house because I was the oldest. Mr. Hayes shook his head. He wanted both grandchildren to act like family. That was always his intention. For several minutes, nobody said a word. Then Daniel surprised me. If you want to keep it, he said quietly, buy my share at fair market value. I won't fight you. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first honest sentence I had heard from him in years. After reviewing the appraisal, I agreed. A month later, the papers were signed properly. The farmhouse officially became mine. Before leaving, Daniel paused at the front porch. I should have asked instead of assuming, he admitted. I simply nodded. Some mistakes can be repaired, others can only be acknowledged. Grandpa would have understood the difference. The first thing I did after moving in was restore Grandpa's study. His old oak desk stayed exactly where it had always been. The hidden compartment remained untouched, except for one addition, a framed copy of his final letter. Every Sunday, my children visited the farmhouse. They learned how to plant tomatoes in Grandpa's garden, fix squeaky doors with simple tools, and sit quietly on the porch, watching sunsets instead of screens. One afternoon, my daughter asked why I never sold the property. I smiled and pointed to the fields outside. This place reminds us that trust is worth more than money. Years later, Daniel came by with his own family. There were no arguments, no lawyers, no contracts spread across the kitchen table. Just coffee, pie, and stories about the grandfather who had quietly planned ahead so his family would one day understand what truly mattered. When the evening ended, Daniel stood beside the old mailbox and looked back at the house. I finally get it, he said. It was never about owning the farm. I looked at the letter safely framed on Grandpa's desk. No, I replied. It was about earning the right to protect it. The farmhouse still stands today, not because of a lawsuit, not because of luck, but because one thoughtful grandfather left behind more than property. He left behind proof, patience, and a final lesson. Greed can divide a family in a single afternoon,